Well, since it is Mother's Day today, I thought it might be good for us to look at some godly mothers in the Bible. And we want to consider them as examples to us. Even those of us who are not mothers can still learn good lessons from the godly mothers of the Bible. And so we want to think about that. As we begin, I want to start with a poem called simply Mother by Wilda Schrock Oatley. I'm glad that God gave me no other to guide me life's perilous way than a dear old-fashioned mother, new-fashioned in Christ, I should say. A mother whose standards were taken from a holy, infallible book. A mother whose faith was unshaken, who led me toward heaven to look. She taught me to reverence the Bible, God's word to believe and obey. She told me the way of salvation. From her I learned early to pray. Glad that my soul was entrusted to one who knew Jesus divine. Her joy in the Lord never rusted, that good Christian mother of mine. There can never for me be another, sincerely and truly I say. Thank God for that kind of mother. God, give us more like her today. I know that not everyone in the world is fortunate enough to have a godly mother. But certainly for those who are, and even for those who maybe didn't, we could still echo that last line. Thank God for that kind of mother. Give us more like her today. We need more godly mothers as our nation and the world gets further and further from God. We need more women who will bring their families back to thinking about God and learning from the Bible. As we think about godly mothers in the Bible, there are several that we could consider. Some of them are not even named. There are certainly a lot of mothers in the Bible that were not very good mothers as well, and we don't want to focus on them this morning. But as I was thinking about this, there are 5 mothers that really stand out to me throughout the scriptures that we want to look at this morning. And we can learn a lot from these Bible mothers. As we consider Proverbs chapter 1 and verses 7 through 9, Solomon says there, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. My son, hear the instruction of thy father, and forsake not the law of thy mother. For they shall be an ornament of grace unto thy head, and chains about thy neck. The teachings that we get from our parents are decorations that decorate our lives. And we can see it. We can meet somebody years down the road when they're 50, 60, 70, 80 years old or older, and we can tell really quickly whether they were raised right. It's easy to see. Now, some people weren't raised right, but later they came to Christ and learned themselves. That was a struggle for them. And there certainly were some people that were raised right, but they got away from it as they got older and rebelled against those things. But generally speaking, we can tell when we meet somebody whether they have that ornament of grace around their head or whether they've thrown it off. As we think about these mothers, though, the first one we want to consider is Jochebed. Jochebed, the mother of Moses, was a mother of action. She didn't wait around for other people to do things. She took action. In Numbers chapter 26 and verse 59, as we read about this family, it says, "And the name of Amram's wife was Jochebed, the daughter of Levi, whom her mother bare to Levi in Egypt. And she bare unto Amram Aaron and Moses and Miriam their sister. So she was a mother of three. But she was a mother of action because during that time, we all know, the decree came down from the Pharaoh, from the king, that they were to destroy any boy babies that were born. Aaron was safe as the oldest. He was born before that decree came down. Miriam was safe. She was a girl. But when Moses was born, the law was that he was to be killed. He was supposed to be thrown in the river. And we don't know how many, but certainly countless Israelite babies were killed during that time. But Jochebed was not going to allow that to happen to her son. She was a mother of action who took things seriously. She was a woman of faith. Hebrews 11 verse 23 says, by faith, Moses, when he was born, was hid 3 months by his parents because they saw he was a proper child, and they were not afraid of the king's commandment. I can't imagine them not being afraid. But to say the least, their courage overcame their fear. They feared God more than they feared the king. And so they did what God taught was right rather than what the king said was right. But they hid him for 3 months. Can you imagine? We've never been through this kind of situation in this country. I've read stories, true stories, of Jewish people who lived in Germany during World War II, during the time of the Nazis. And you hear the stories of them trying to hide as the German soldiers were ransacking a house and going door to door trying to find the Jews that were hiding. One very disturbingly sad story was told of a young mother and her baby who were trying to hide, and the baby was whimpering and crying. And in the process of trying to hide, that mother smothered her baby to death, trying to keep it quiet while they were hiding. Can you imagine Moses' mother and father? Knowing that if the soldiers found that baby boy, not only would the baby boy be killed, but they would likely be in serious trouble as well. She was really willing to risk her life for what was right, to hide him. And she passed her faith on to Moses. In Hebrews 11, verses 24 through 29, it says, by faith Moses, when he was come to years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Remember, Pharaoh's daughter, she finally, being that mother of action, she knew he was getting too big to hide, so she made a little boat, put it in the water, and Miriam was watching, and the little boat floated down the river, and Pharaoh's daughter found that little boat with that baby in it. Talk about the providence of God. No telling who could have found that little boat with that little baby in it, but it was Pharaoh's own daughter. And being an Egyptian, you'd think she would have immediately reported it and had that baby killed. But apparently Pharaoh's daughter wasn't a lot like him, because she rescued that baby and raised it as her own. But she needed somebody to be a nursemaid. She needed somebody to watch that baby for her, and someone to nurse it. And there were a lot of Israelite women who had lost babies and could have nursed a baby. But Miriam said, well, let me fetch one for you. And she went and got her own mother, Moses' own mother. You know, the one thing that's interesting here is I always wondered, maybe we'll get a chance to ask one day. I wonder what Moses' real name was. Moses is the name that he was given by Pharaoh's daughter. That wasn't the name his parents gave him. I wonder what his name was. Just have to wonder. But I always wonder about little things like that in the scriptures. What was his birth name? He was called Moses by Pharaoh's daughter when she drew him out of the river. The word Moses means drawn out. And so that's what she named him. A good Egyptian name, not a Hebrew name. Probably made it more difficult for the Israelites to want to follow a guy with an Egyptian name when they came time to leave Egypt. But it says, by faith Moses, when he was come to years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he had respect to the recompense of the reward. Think about for just a minute, what would it be like to be raised in the household of the king? Most of us can't imagine what that would be like. We're not princes and princesses. Moses, in theory, was in line to be Pharaoh one day, if the circumstances fell right. Depending on who lived and who died, of aunts and uncles and cousins and things, he could possibly have one day ruled the nation, and he threw that away. Paul talks about how he considered the great things that he was accomplishing in the Jewish religion to be rubbish in order to gain Christ. But what Paul had going for him in the Jewish religion, that was nothing compared to where Moses was headed. Moses was considered grandson to Pharaoh. But he threw that all away because he thought the riches of Christ were greater. He gave up the pleasures that come, the indulgences that come with being in the family of the king, the Pharaoh, and suffered instead. Suffered affliction. Wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, eating the same thing for breakfast, lunch, and dinner for 40 years in the wilderness, with only a couple of exceptions occasionally. Think about what he went through. There's no way that he just woke up one morning when he was 30 or 40 years old and said, I want to be different than this. His mother, who raised him in the Pharaoh's household, was his nursemaid, taught him who he was. Otherwise, how would he have even known that he was an Israelite? How would he have even known he was Jewish? He wouldn't have even necessarily known it if somebody hadn't taught him. I can't imagine what his mother went through raising him. She was a mother of action and a woman of faith, great faith, to do that each and every day. And she passed that faith down to Moses. The second one we want to consider is Hannah. Hannah, the mother of Samuel, a mother of sacrifice. Now, in a way, Jochebed had to sacrifice her son as well. She had to give him up to grow up in the king's household, and certainly there was probably a time when she was not allowed to continue being there with him once he was grown to a certain age and didn't need a nursemaid any longer. But Hannah's a special woman. There was a certain man from Mount Ephraim. His name was Elkanah. He had two wives. One was Hannah, the other was Peninnah. Peninnah had children. Hannah didn't have any. Now, he loved Hannah as much as he loved his other wife. He tried to comfort her when she didn't have children. But one of the trips they made to Shiloh, which is where the tabernacle was, this was before the temple was built. One of those trips that they made, we read about all of this in 1 Samuel chapter 1. Beginning in verse 9, after they had eaten in Shiloh and after they had drunk, then Eli the priest sat upon a seat by the post of the temple of the Lord. And she, Hannah, was in bitterness of soul, and prayed unto the Lord, and wept sore. And she vowed a vow. There's someone who's a woman not only of sacrifice, but of her word. She made a promise and she kept it. But think about the vow that she vowed. O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your handmaid, and remember me, don't forget your handmaid, but give me a boy, a child that's a boy, a man-child, King James says. Then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and there shall no razor come upon his head. She was promising he'd be a Nazirite. He would make the Nazirite vow. No razor on his head. He wouldn't, along with that, he wouldn't eat of grapes or touch things that were dead, any of those things. And it came to pass as she continued praying before the Lord that Eli watched her mouth. And Hannah spoke in her heart, only her lips were moving. And Eli thought she was drunk. She was a misunderstood woman too, and falsely accused. He jumps on her and says, how long are you going to be drunk? Put away the wine. What are you thinking coming in here to this holy place drunk like that? What's wrong with you, woman? But Hannah said, oh no, I am a woman of sorrowful spirit. I have not been drinking wine or strong drink. I've poured out my soul before the Lord. And so Eli said, go in peace. May the God of Israel grant your petition that you have asked. And she went, and of course we know the rest of the story. God granted her request. She had a child. She named him Samuel because I have asked him of the Lord. Elkanah kept going up to the yearly sacrifices, but Hannah didn't go up. She said, I'm not going up until the child is weaned, and then I'm going to take him, so he'll appear before the Lord and abide there forever. It's one thing to make a promise of something you don't have. It's another thing when you have it. I don't know how many people say, well, if I won the lottery, I'd give it all to the church, or I'd give it all away to this charity or that charity, or I'd do this or that. Yeah, it's easy to say what you do when you don't have it. It was easy for Hannah to say when she didn't have a child, oh, if you give me a child, I'll give him back to you. It's a different story once she has the child. And as she's raising this child, and as she's getting closer and closer connections with this child, that's her son. And then as the time grows nearer for her to fulfill that vow and take him to the tabernacle and to give him up, how hard it must have been. But she was a mother of sacrifice. She sacrificed her desires, her wants, for what God wanted. She also was a woman of faith and prayer. All of these women are going to be women of faith, without a doubt. But she was a woman of faith and of prayer. She's one of the few women in the scriptures that we see praying. How powerful her prayer was. And of course, she did what she said she would do. In verse 27, she said, "For this child I prayed, and the Lord has given me my petition that I asked of him. Therefore I have lent him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he shall be lent to the Lord." She was willing to give her son to the service of others. And she encouraged him in his devotion to God. She would bring him a little coat every year. Wonder how she knew how big he was getting. And every year she'd bring him a new coat to wear. She'd come see him once a year. That's got to be tough. She sacrificed that for the good of keeping her vow to God and for the good of others. Now we think about what the benefits of her sacrifice were. Samuel, writing books of the Bible, a prophet in a time when there wasn't much prophecy, when visions from God were a rarity. In fact, God had been being quiet for a while when Samuel came along and God spoke to him. Very special man. Wasn't a perfect man, but might have been a better man if she'd have kept raising him instead of Eli. But she was a woman of faith and prayer, a woman of sacrifice, a woman who encouraged her son to serve God for the rest of his life. And he did. He served God faithfully. He didn't do such a great job raising his own kids, but he was faithful to God throughout his life. And all of Israel had to acknowledge when they started calling out for a king, and he said, "Where have I ever cheated anybody or done anything?" And they said, "You never have." Said, "You've never done any of those things." But they said, "Your sons aren't like you." But how much of an influence Hannah had on him from the time that he was a little boy. The third is actually two mothers that we want to consider. Lois and Eunice, mother and grandmother to Timothy, mothers of faith and perseverance. I think it's hard for women in America today to imagine. I know there are still sexist pigs out there that mistreat women. I know that they're still out there. But the freedoms and rights that a woman in America has compared to what things were like in their day and age, I think it's hard for a woman to imagine what that was like. Being married off to a man that you maybe didn't even know because he paid a dowry or because some arrangement was made by your parents. And in the case of Timothy's mother and grandmother, we have a situation where, and sometimes people kind of pick on them about what we find out is that Timothy's father was not Jewish. He was a Greek. He didn't follow the Jewish law. He didn't stick to the law of Moses and didn't teach Timothy to. So it all fell on Timothy's mother. And somebody say, well, why'd she marry that man then? Why didn't she marry a good Jewish man? She didn't have a choice in the matter. She did not get to pick who she married. Don't blame her. But in spite of that, she did the best that she could do, and she raised a young man who, again, apparently became quite a great servant for God. One that Paul took under his wing and thought great things of and encouraged greatly. But she persevered. She stayed with that husband. She raised that child. We don't know if she had any other children besides Timothy. That's the only one we know about. and her mother may have been in a similar situation. We don't know all that much about the grandmother as much as the mother. But notice what Paul says to Timothy about them. In 2 Timothy chapter 1 and verses 3 through 5. I thank God whom I serve from my ancestors' time with a pure conscience, that without ceasing I have remembrance of you in my prayers day and night, greatly desiring to see you, being mindful of your tears, that I may be filled with joy. When I call to remembrance the sincere faith that is in you. Now, where did that come from? Timothy's got this sincere faith in him. It's not fake. King James says it's unfeigned. He's not just putting on a show. It's real. It's deep down inside. What about that? Where'd that come from? Which dwelt first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and I am persuaded it's in you also. You think about that. Paul honors these two women. Nothing to say about his father and his grandfather, but these two, the mother and grandmother, they were faithful women. And they persevered in spite of being with men apparently who weren't a very good role models. Now we know that about Eunice. We know that she was married to a Greek. But why do I say that about Lois? Because if Lois's husband was a faithful Jewish man, he wouldn't have picked a Greek for his daughter to marry. Which makes me believe very strongly that he was not a godly man either. And it's tough on a woman to live with a man that's not a godly man. It's hard enough for her to live with a man that's trying to do what's right. But it's really rough when he's not a godly man. They persevered, though. They went through it. 2 Timothy 3, verses 14 and 15. He says, but continue in the things that you have learned and have been assured of, knowing of whom you have learned them, that from a child you have known the Holy Scriptures. His mother and grandmother taught him the Scriptures from the time he was a child. They didn't wait and say, well, when he gets older. He wouldn't understand it now. But when he gets older, then no, they took from the time he was a child. Those Holy Scriptures which are able to make you wise to salvation through faith in Jesus Christ. 3 generations of faithful, godly people. Grandmother, daughter, grandson. But all because of their faith and perseverance. What mothers they were. The 5th, which is the 4th point, 5th person, is Mary, the mother of Jesus. I don't think it'd be possible to talk about great mothers in the Bible and leave her out. We saved the best for last. And if anybody wants to argue that point, I'd say, go ahead and argue, but you're wrong. If there's any doubt that Mary was the best mother there ever was, consider that God chose her to be the mother of his son. He would have only picked the best for his son. And what a woman she was. The mother of Jesus. Mother with a full heart. I'm sure there were times in her life where her heart was so full it felt like it was going to burst. Full of joy, full of confusion at various different points, full of sorrow and sadness. In Luke 1, verses 26 and following, we read about the angel Gabriel coming to Nazareth. And it's funny that the best mother of them all came from a place that was disrespected by most people. Just goes to show the difference in what God knows and what people know. To a virgin who was engaged or espoused to a man whose name was Joseph, the virgin's name was Mary. And the angel came and said, "Blessed are you among women, highly favored, the Lord is with you." When she saw him, she was troubled. She kind of figured out what's going on. I don't know about you, I've never had an angel come announce himself to me. That'd be kind of frightening, I would think. A lot of times when angels do appear to people, the first thing they have to say is, "Don't be afraid, it's okay." But here he comes to her, and she's troubled at his salutation. And then the angel says to her, "Do not be afraid, Mary, for you have found favor with God. You shall conceive and bring forth a son and call his name Jesus. He shall be great and shall be called the Son of the Highest, and the Lord God shall give him the throne of his father David." And you want to talk about confused. A young woman who'd never been with a man, and now she's being told she's going to have a baby. And that baby is going to be the ruler of Israel like his ancestor David. And he's going to be called the Son of the Most High. Can you imagine what's going through her mind? Can you imagine her heart racing? First in fear, now in consternation. No, I can't have a baby. All of these things. What a situation to be thrust into. And the day before, she'd been just a normal young lady. Just a normal young teenager, probably. Some people estimate that she may have only been 14 or 15 years old. We don't really know exactly how old she was. But she was just a young woman. And yet here she is being told that she is going to be the mother of God's Son. In Luke chapter 2 and verse 19, after some other events occurred, particularly John jumping in Elizabeth's womb, for one thing. Other things, they took when they took Jesus to the temple and had Anna and Simeon come up and start singing praises to God and glorifying God about this child and everything. And it says, though, but Mary kept all these things and pondered them in her heart. Can you imagine then? All these things, she remembers what she was told before the baby was born. She hears these things at his birth from these two prophets, really. And then, as he grows up, I'm sure there were a lot of normal things that children do when they grow up. And he probably got sick. He probably spit up on her. They had to change the poopy diapers, all of those things. But throughout all of that, she's remembering who this child that she's raising is. And then seemingly, now when he's 12, then they go to the temple. Joseph and Mary and Jesus go, and after he's left there and they come back and they find him, and he said, "Didn't you know I had to be about my Father's business?" And they didn't understand. You'd think maybe she would have. Maybe she would have remembered, oh yeah, God's his Father. But it says he went back home with them to Nazareth and was subject to him. But his mother kept all these sayings in her heart. Her heart's getting full. All these sayings, all these things that are happening with this child. And then can you imagine the frustration when she knows who he is? And at the wedding feast in Cana, she begs him to help them out because they're out of wine. And then she goes to the servants and she says, anything he tells you, you do it. And don't you know she wished how many times throughout his ministry when people were arguing against him and weren't listening to him and weren't paying attention to his miracles, how many times did she want to take them and say, whatever he tells you to do, do it? And how many of us, if she could come back, would she shake that finger in our face and say, whatever he says, do it? And there are so many people who aren't listening. How frustrating that must have been for her. What a woman of faith to tell those servants, knowing the power that he had, knowing what he could do. Whatever he says, do it. That's good advice for all of us. Whatever he says, do it. Well, we need godly mothers today. Mothers of action, mothers of sacrifice, faith, perseverance, mothers of heart, tender hearts, full hearts. We need children who heed godly mothers. We need to be those kinds of children. Proverbs 10 and verse 1 says, a wise son makes a glad father, but a foolish son is the heaviness of his mother. How many of us have done those things that made our mothers heavy with sorrow because of the things that we did? Proverbs 15:20 says, a wise son makes a glad father, but a foolish man despises his mother. And I know, sometimes as a man, you got to be a man and break free from mama's apron strings, right, at some point. And it can be frustrating because to her, you're always her little boy. But a foolish man despises his mother. Proverbs 23:22 through 26 again talks about the father and mother being glad, and the one that bare you will rejoice if you'll buy the truth and not sell it. Get wisdom, instruction, and understanding. Be righteous and wise, and your mother will rejoice. You know, not all of us certainly are going to be, or have been, or will be, or could be godly mothers. Not all of us had godly mothers. But when we study about these godly mothers in the Bible, the traits that they show us, the examples that they leave for us, are things that are traits we need to have even if we're not mothers. If you're here and you're not a Christian, a godly mother would want you to be one. Every good mother would want you to be a Christian. If you are a Christian, but maybe you haven't been living in a way that your mother would be proud of, maybe you've been an embarrassment to your mother, you need to repent of some things in your life and get back right with God. So be something that your mom could be proud of again. If you're here and you have a need to respond to God's invitation for any reason, please do as we stand and sing the invitation song. God is calling, the prodigal come with